welcome back to part 3 of my complete PlayStation 1 collection. This time we'll be looking at a sore topic for game collectors, platinum games. But that's not all. We've got oddities, big box games, and most importantly, wrestling games. Hello again, folks, and welcome back to part 3 of this 4-part series where I go through my entire PlayStation 1 collection. It is a massive collection, and I've had to split it into multiple videos and really break it down so we can really look in depth to my collection of one of the most influential consoles of all time. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and please subscribe, as I put new videos out every Saturday live at 5, as well as bonus content like this video throughout the week, and I don't want you missing any of my amazing gaming journey. Now, let's step back in time to my PlayStation 1 collection. For me, one of the most important things about the PlayStation 1 was its affordability. It was getting a lot cheaper to mass produce video games. As they were made on CDs, they were a lot cheaper to make, and we started to have the Platinum line of games. This was a cheaper, budget way for people to play some of the biggest titles on the PlayStation. But Platinum didn't just mean cheap games. You couldn't just release a game as a Platinum game. To get a Platinum release, the game had to sell over 400,000 units. Then it got its Platinum release. And this was a good thing for gamers. You could play some of the biggest games at a much cheaper price. Back in the day on the PlayStation 1, most games released at $39.99. But Platinum games were just $19.99, half the price. So you could play some amazing titles at half of the price. That is a win for everyone, or is it? A lot of people absolutely detest the design of the Platinum cases. I, for one, do prefer the black label cases, but today we're going to start with looking through my Platinum Games collection. Here's one of the first Platinum games I ever added into my collection, Crash Bandicoot, an absolutely iconic franchise on the PlayStation 1. And this was the best thing about Platinum versions of games. You could play these big games for half the price. And trust me, some of the biggest franchises went Platinum. This is a bit of a weird thing for me in my collection to have an entire franchise's games on a console in the Platinum version. But I have Spyro the Dragon, the original release, Spyro 2, Gateway to Glimmer, and also Spyro 3, Year of the Dragon. And that's the thing, if you had bought all of these games back in the day, it would have cost you £120. Buying the Platinum releases, you could get this entire trilogy of games for just 60 quid. For me, I will always prefer the originals of these games, but if you really want to go back and experience them, some people will find it easier just to play the re-releases of both of these trilogies on the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. But for me, I'm just a purist. I think anyone who owns a PlayStation 1 definitely has Driver 1 and Driver 2 in their collection, but how many of you folks have actually completed these games? I think this is easily the hardest tutorial of all time in both of these games. I think I had to cheat to even play the main game of these. Seriously, if you think Dark Souls is hard, go back and play Driver. One thing that is annoying about Platinum releases is that I have kind of a whole series of games split over Black Label and Platinum. So here we have Tomb Raider 2 and Tomb Raider 3. I think I have nearly all of the Tomb Raider games on PlayStation 1, but they are half Black Label and half Platinum. And this is the thing, Platinum games really play with my OCD so much that when they're on the shelf I put all of my Platinum games together, as I don't want them mixing in with the Black Label titles. One good thing for us collectors though is that Platinum games are usually cheaper. So here I have Spider-Man 1 and 2, and trust me, these are games that are getting slightly more expensive, and sometimes the better option is to pick up the Platinum releases. Yes, they may have that silver ugly banner at the bottom, but if you just want to play the games from your childhood and just relive some of these classics, Platinum games can be a cheaper way to achieve that. You even had games with multiple discs released on Platinum, such as Chase the Express, which I think is a really underrated game. If you enjoy your third-person shooters such as Metal Gear Solid, or even a little bit of Resident Evil, I would definitely check this one out. It's also super cheap as well, so definitely look to add this one into your PlayStation 1 collection. For me, one of the best games I picked up in Platinum back in the day was G-Police. This was a game I wasn't sure about, but when me and my friend went into, I think it was HMV or Virgin Megastores back in the day, and saw this at a platinum price of 20 quid, we decided to pick it up and we were blown away. This was a game we spent the entire night playing into the early hours, and that for me was what the PlayStation 1 was all about. Playing all night with your mate and experiencing games you never thought you'd wanted to play before. For a lot of people, they grew up with the PlayStation 1, and one of the main things to consider was you didn't have all the money in the world. You normally had to save up either your pocket money or wait for a birthday or Christmas to pick up a game. So platinum games were a way to get either a very cheap game or twice the number of games for your money. And this game, Command & Conquer, was a game I really wanted, but I just couldn't manage to save up the 40 quid. So I was so happy when this went to platinum. And to this day, it's still one of my favourite strategy games of all time. And this was the first time I was able to play kind of strategy games. I didn't have a PC that could run games such as Command & Conquer. And up until this point, this was a genre of games that just hadn't been on home consoles. So this for me was an absolute game changer, especially when it came to platinum on the PlayStation 1. Platinum was just such a good way to experience so many of the games that make the PlayStation 1 what it was. Games such as Oddworld, Abe's Odyssey. This was a game that I'm sure everyone played back in the day on a demo, but maybe you didn't want to spend that full 40 quid. The Platinum release made this a really affordable game. And talking about affordability and value, there is not many games better than Die Hard Trilogy. You got not one, not two, but 3 games for just 20 quid. You got the kind of arena shooter of Die Hard. You got the amazing light gun game of Die Hard 2. And you got the incredibly weird Die Hard 3 running over pedestrian simulator. This is one of the best value games on the PlayStation 1. Next up, we have a couple of platinum oddities, and one thing I don't really see, I don't know if it's just me and my personal collecting, I don't see many sports games on the platinum releases. Maybe just not that many sports games sold that 400,000 copies needed to become a platinum games. But one game that definitely did was GTA. But this again is a bit of an oddity as it is an alternate cover. I have never seen this cover until I picked this up in a bundle of games, so let me know, is this a strange release? I will of course be talking more about Grand Theft Auto in the next episode in this PlayStation 1 collecting series, so stick around for more about one of the best games of all time. The PlayStation 1 had an incredible selection of iconic racing games, so it's no surprise that loads of these games went platinum and sold over 400,000 copies. Games such as Gran Turismo 2, one of the most iconic racing games of all time. Destruction Derby 2, one of my favourite games still to this day, just because I love the fact you could destroy each other's cars. Multiplayer games such as Micro Machines V3, which with a multi-tab is absolute multiplayer perfection. Get a few mates, get this, get 4 controllers, get wrecked. Then we have games such as Toka Touring Cars, which I think everyone had in their PlayStation collection at some point. Other iconic arcade racing games such as Ridge Racer Revolution. Then you get some of the games that are slightly more surprising. It's actually quite surprising to me that Road Rash, it is a game I really like, but I'm surprised it got to that platinum sales rank, and especially the Italian job. Even though if you are a collector like myself, you will know you will always pick this up in any PlayStation 1 bundle. But it's not just games like this that really surprised me they sold over 400,000 copies. The final platinum games here are the ones that genuinely surprised me that they went platinum. They're not necessarily bad games, but I'm just surprised. Games such as Croc. I thought everyone would just be playing Crash Bandicoot or Spyro. You wouldn't have thought there'd be room for a third kind of platformer on the PlayStation 1. Also, how did Dancing Stage Evolution sell that many copies? I don't know, I suppose it was such a craze back then, it just sold like hotcakes. This is a weird one, The Lost World for the PlayStation 1. I'm a huge fan of all of the Jurassic Park films. Come at me in the comments below. I'm not sure how I feel about this game. It is equal parts brilliance and awfulness. Games such as Monsters Inc. Scare Island. I'm surprised this sold 400,000 copies. And also Donald Duck Quack Attack. But if you're a collector, keep an eye out for this one as it is slowly getting more and more expensive. Before we go on to the big box PlayStation 1 games, I want to present to you the crossover. And these are two games that I'm sure people have wondered why I've not been in one of the videos before. They are, of course, Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII. For some reason, I only own these games on the Platinum line. I have no idea why. I just don't seem to come across the Black Label versions of these absolutely iconic games. I'm sure a lot of you are wondering why they weren't in a collection, but it is because they are the Platinum releases. The big box PS1 games are a bit of an oddity as they come in these obviously bigger boxes. One of the main reasons for this is some games had multiple discs, such as Family Games Compendium, which has not one, not two, but 3 discs. But not all games had multiple discs. We have games that just have 1 disc, such as Crazy Ivan, True Pinball, Breakpoint, and the absolutely iconic Worms. Sometimes these games only had 1 disc because that's all they needed for the data. Sometimes they came with bonus discs, such as a copy of Worms, which came with an autumn and Christmas release disc. But one of the theories is why we had these bigger box games back in the early days of the PlayStation 1 is because they were still waiting for the pattern on that classic PlayStation 1 box design. But of course there are other reasons why we had big box games. Some games such as Worms had pretty thick manuals, which didn't really fit as easily into the small boxes of the PlayStation 1. That's because these are released all across the PAL regions and had to have multiple languages in, so sometimes they use the bigger boxes to fit these bigger manuals. One of the problems with these games, which I have here with this copy of Doom, which is an absolutely iconic game, is these cases were fairly fragile and easily break. But if you're a collector like myself, a nice little hack, if you get a CD case which has multiple discs, they are the exact same cases. That is a cheap and easy way to replace these sometimes hard to come by bigger boxes. Of course, one of the main reasons these big box games came in a big box is because a lot of these games had multiple discs. Games such as the X-Files had 4 discs because the FMV files on these discs did take back then quite a lot of data. That was the thing with the PlayStation 1. We were starting to see a lot more FMV in games, and this took a lot of data on a CD which couldn't hold a huge amount of data. So games such as Command & Conquer Back Again had to be on a big box to facilitate those multiple discs. Especially games such as the iconic Rebel Assault 2, which has some incredible FMV sequences, needed this big box to hold the multiple games. And one of my favourites, Wing Commander 4, which has 4 discs, and again, some of the most iconic FMV sequences seen in any game, even to this day. A nice segue to our next section, which is oddities, is these 2 oddities. The double game packs. There was quite a few of these released on the PlayStation 1, and these are not in the big box, but they have multiple games inside. Sadly, with this copy of Hogs of War and Worms, sadly I do only have the Worms disc. I am missing Hogs of War, but one thing I've learned from making this series on my PlayStation 1 collection is the games I'm missing, and Hogs of War is very high on that list of games I need to add to my PS1 collection. Let's start off with a few oddities then, but these are games I didn't really know how to categorise as I was making this series. Games such as Gauntlet Legends, which is an absolutely amazing multiplayer game, but I didn't really know where to slide it into this series. Then we have another one of the dancing games. These were games that were getting more and more popular as you could kind of recreate these cheaply at home on the PlayStation 1. Also, games such as Worms World Party, absolutely amazing multiplayer game, but not the weirdest Worms game on the PlayStation 1. That goes to Worms Pinball. You don't think they would make a Worms pinball game. It is a kind of weird way, and not one I expected a franchise to go down to, but these are certainly not the weirdest games on the PS1. Fishing games, that's right folks, the PlayStation 1 had an entire genre of fishing games. Games such as Action Bass and also Reel Fishing 2, which of course means there must have been an original Reel Fishing, and this kind of led on to some really weird advancements on the PlayStation 1. Now, I didn't really want to get into kind of accessories and peripherals for the PlayStation 1 in this video series too much, but I needed to talk about the fishing controller. That's right, a controller you can plug into your PlayStation 1 to really play those fishing games to their full potential. This is definitely a real oddity on the PS1. Here we have it then, what I think are the weirdest PlayStation 1 games in my collection. A game such as Creatures, which is really odd. It's basically like having a virtual pet on your PlayStation 1. A very odd game, a very common game. You'll very often get it in bundles, but trust me, we are only going to get weirder. Sabrina the Teenage Witch has its own game on the PlayStation 1. Again, this is a game that comes up in bundles all the time for some bizarre reason. But for me, I think possibly the weirdest PlayStation 1 game in my collection comes from Midas Games. Midas Games made some incredibly weird, somewhat educational games. I think they just took franchises as such as Moses, Prince of Egypt, and kind of made dodgy knockoff Disney style games. Avoid these like the plague. They are truly a plague. Our final genre of games for this episode have had a profound effect on my life. They have been so inspirational, but trust me, you'll have to stick around to the end of this episode to truly say what I'm saying. We are of course talking about wrestling games. Sadly, I have just put Ultimate Fighting Contest in this section just because I wasn't really sure where else to put it in this series. But of course, there is some terrible wrestling games on the PlayStation 1, such as Celebrity Deathmatch. This is truly awful. Like, if you want to play a terrible game, play this. But if this isn't bad enough, check out The Simpsons Wrestling. This is one of the most annoying, aggravating, glitchy, crappy games I have ever played. If the terrible graphics don't put you off, the abysmal controls surely will. When we talk about wrestling games on the PlayStation 1, the WWF might not be the first thing that comes to your mind, but before they got the F out, we had WWF games such as WrestleMania the arcade game, and this is a game which isn't exactly how you'd imagine a wrestling game to be. This was more kind of akin to Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter, but for nothing else, this game had absolutely amazing commentary. But it wasn't the only classic WWF game on the PS1. We also had WWF In Your House, again a game which is more akin to Mortal Kombat, and again a game which has an incredible commentary section. This game is amazing. It is really not your traditional run-of-the-mill wrestling game, but word of warning, this is a game which is getting more and more expensive, so if you want to add it to your PS1 collection, I'd grab it sooner rather than later. The PlayStation 1 was released at a very exciting point in the history of wrestling, the Monday Night Wars, when the WWF was at full war with its main competition, WCW. And of course there had to be video games such as WCW Mayhem, which I have here in the black label, and the really ugly Value Series variant. The thing is, this isn't the best wrestling game by a long shot, and I think in the war, the WWF definitely won the video game war. But it wasn't just in the ring that the wrestling war was at hand, it was also on the consoles. So at this time, different consoles had different wrestling games. So of course, SmackDown was on the PlayStation 1. This was at a time when the N64 had WrestleMania 2000, which, in my eyes, I really prefer. I find SmackDown a little bit fast and a little bit arcadey. So I have the black label copy as well as the platinum copy. And of course, this game got a sequel in SmackDown 2. But on the N64, we got WWF No Mercy, which is of course one of the greatest wrestling games of all time. But we're going to go on to the final wrestling games on my PlayStation 1 collection, and these to me are absolutely iconic and an absolute influence on myself as a gamer and in general life. The final games we're going to talk about this time are some of the most influential video games to me of all time. And I'll explain why, as this one is a bit weird. As you know, I am a lifelong gamer, and you would think I've been a lifelong wrestling fan, but it was actually playing WWF Warzone that got me into wrestling in the very first place. This, strangely, was the first PlayStation game I ever played, and it blew me away for one reason. The create a wrestler in this game blew my mind. I never knew you could have freedom to make somewhat of an avatar of yourself or anyone in this game. me and my friends would make anything. We made Lara Croft, Duke Nukem, Mario, versions of ourselves, and use them to fight in the ring. I'd never seen this kind of freedom in a video game, and it blew my mind. And that was before even seeing the wrestling. Before this, I'd never watched wrestling, and this game made me want to watch wrestling. I remember playing this, I think it was on a Saturday, and on a Sunday I watched the very first pay-per-view I ever watched, King of the Ring, with one of the most iconic matches ever, the McMahons versus Stone Cold in a ladder match for control of the WWF. It was an absolutely life-changing event. And that brings us to the final game this episode, WWF Attitude, a game that took everything from Warzone and just made it that little bit better. This, for me, for a long while, was wrestling perfection. Nowadays, this game is totally and utterly surpassed by games such as No Mercy, even the WWE 2K games. But for me, these were the games where wrestling started, not just in video games, but the entire world. They have so much influence on me. I take so much of my music taste from wrestling, and even my general demeanour. The kind of attitude era of wrestling made me who I am today, be that a good thing or a bad thing. So there we have it. We are nearly through my entire PlayStation 1 collection. I have one more episode left of this series where I'm going to be looking at the best of the best. But looking back on WWF Warzone, it just showed me how much of an influence the PlayStation 1 had on me as a person. But let me know down in the comments below, what was the most influential game on the PlayStation 1 for yourself? It may not be such a random one such as WWF Warzone for you, it could be anything, but let me know down in the comments below. I hope you've enjoyed this video as we continue to deep dive into my PlayStation 1 collection. I put all these videos together in a playlist, you can watch them all at once. Stay tuned for the final episode, and as always, keep playing the game. See y'all soon!